do it.
Is that it? Okay. We'll do that right after the consent agenda.
Okay.
So you need this.
Anyone on the council
No,
have any
I'm so sorry, I
conflicts
did
of
not read
interest?
it to him.
Anything on the agenda?
He did not read it to
I
him.
know.
You didn't get to them? But they've done the first.
They did. Sorry about that.
Okay.
If we need to read them
Mike,
I'm not sure, are we talking about that? The conflict of interest, you know, with Ultra? Yes.
in. We did.
Do you know as long as it's not with the city or something?
I think it's Mayor, Councilmember Aiken, if you'd like to disclose the information, just so that there's not an appearance of impropriety, then that's something you can do. I think we talked about whether there was an actual conflict, and we determined that there is not, but that doesn't stop you from providing information.
So I've contacted Rand Ultra and I've been doing snow removal for him, so I'm not as a conflict or not. I think they said it wasn't, but I just want to disclose that.
sounds to me like aligned interest, not conflict of interest. I think that's great.
I see no conflict.
The regular bill list through December 28th, 2018, and the city council minutes for January 2nd, 2019. Is there anything there to review?
So we have to make a motion to approve the consent agenda and the regular bill list through December 28th, 2018, and city council minutes for January 2nd, 2019.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent agenda is approved.
Mr. Mayor, council members, this is just a brief overview of some information about the recent water break on the main line. I will put some additional copies for anyone who's interested back here. So just to give you a brief on it, we have, let's see, on this past Friday, January 11th, at approximately 6:45 a.m., we had a mainline break to the 300 block of Eureka, and this was on a 12-inch water main, and specifically it was on or affecting a valve, and that valve failed, and that's what essentially sent water, a 3 to 4 foot geyser coming out of the roadway. The water was shut off immediately, and that water shutoff was near the 750,000 gallon water storage tank that we have. It's just below the water treatment plant. As I go through some of this, I'm sure there will be some questions that we may be able to answer, some at the end as well, but feel free to stop me at any time. The shutoff not only included direct shutoff of the water from the water plant, but also of the booster pumps. We have one main booster pump station. It's a Spring Street station, and that is just on above Roworth on Spring, and that is primarily to pump water up to the apartment building, the KOA, and to the LZ municipal lot. But the other booster pumps are in Prospector's Run. So water, actually, we have kind of some basic drawings just to kind of, they're not on maps because I think it makes it easier the way that it was drawn out, and we'll go over those in just a bit. But that area was shut off because if we don't have water going to it with enough pressure, those pumps can burn out. And so I'll go through some of this, and then Jack Beard and Jason Nelson are also here and can provide additional information and clarification. And so there is another storage tank. It's a 90,000 gallon tank that's just above the Prospectors Run development. And so that's why the booster pumps are in that development, is to take water as it comes down Eureka and into the development, up onto the hillside, into that tank, and then is stored there for gravity feeding down into the development. So after the shutoffs were complete, then the mobilization of resources commenced. We had staff from all departments involved, as well as the contractor, an emergency contract with JBS Incorporated. And they were actually a company that we had contracted and set up to come in this week to do some repairs on some areas that we had some known leaks on. And so this was completely separate and emergent in nature. So they were on site at approximately 11 a.m. We also had some volunteers, and primarily from the Central City Volunteer Fire Department, that were a part of the effort from the moment they were able to get on site and stay through. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Some of the things that were done to alleviate some of the consequences or some of the issues that the residents and businesses would have to deal with. We brought in some portable toilets and bottled water. So that's something that wasn't necessarily required, but something we did for the benefit of our community. Again, the contractor was on site by 11, had equipment here mobilized at about 1 p.m. Some of that equipment that was originally slated for this project couldn't make it up because of the weather, and so that was an excavator. So we did get some other equipment on site though. Utility locates were done. The state regulations require that if we have a loss in pressure on our water line, that requires that we send out public notice of that pressure loss and of potential contamination, and so that's what prompted the boil order. Then the excavation was complete and determined the valve failure at approximately 5 p.m. And given the cause overall for this, as well as other areas that we're addressing right now, are really can only at this point be attributed to age. There really isn't anything else that we can identify there. The valve in question for this incident was a 1991 model. So the parts that were on site were not parts that could be used, and so those parts took a little while to get up here, approximately 6 p.m. Once a repair was made, then a testing was done. We were able to isolate that valve and open up the fire hydrant that was right next to it, and then open up the valve up near the treatment plant where it was turned off to try to start getting that flow down. They were able to show that we weren't having any more leaks at the valve, and they were coming out through and water was coming through that fire hydrant. Let's see, the repair was made then. We started the backfill, and the recharging commenced at approximately 9 p.m. And so the charging of the system was something that was slow and steady operation, something that took a lot of time, and I think I'll maybe veer from some of the sequence of events just to be able to tell you a little bit about what was happening and who was all involved. Again, we had all members of staff involved in everything from the beginning, whether that was through notice in community development to even just making arrangements for pallets of water, and that was also with Public Works. We had Public Works crews that were also dealing with snow removal at the time and assisting and really taking themselves out of the operation to make sure that we were able to take one of the portable toilets up to the apartment building and just spread those resources around. And Jason and Jack were part of it for every second on all operations, as well as on the testing and even notifications. And we had participation from the Sheriff's Department as well in trying to get that word out, reverse 911 notifications, and then even just the mailing notifications, which was above and beyond what was required, only one of several mediums for notification were required. As soon as we had the social media and the website, that was sufficient, but we went ahead and Reba and Susan and others, Ashley, put together as quickly as possible copies and got those out. And so we really made, I think, every effort possible to try to get that information out as fast as we could and as accurately as we could. Meanwhile, again, there were a number of staff that were internal to the organization that were working on this, but we also had the fire department, the volunteer fire department, so somewhat indirectly related, not an actual employee or set of employees. Danny Branning in particular has a lot of knowledge when it comes to these types of situations, as well as just the infrastructure in general. And so he and their team and Jason and Jack and everybody that was working on it formulated a plan. Part of that plan was not only to recharge the system, and getting back to this list very slowly, that was done for a couple different reasons. Some of the impacts of having the water shut off isn't just about losing the water and all the uses that we're able to have with that, but then also the condition of the remaining infrastructure. We want to be able to minimize the harm that can be done with turning water on too fast, pressure reducing valves failing. We know that we have some of these other leaks, including the one that's at the intersection of Main, Eureka, and Lawrence. And really the goal was to try to bring that water pressure back up slowly and enough so that we were able to push out some of the air. So a lot of the, almost every water hydrant, I think, out of 90 plus at various times were opened. And so there may have been some questions about why we had water that was flowing from the fire hydrants, but opening those up allowed for the air to escape from that system, and at the same time closing those slowly safeguarded the system not having that hammering effect. But then also the way that our system is designed is very unique. We have one main booster station, as I was mentioning earlier, that takes water up to the apartment buildings in that area, but the rest of it is all gravity fed and naturally pressured is my layman's term for it, and I think it's static pressure, but essentially what has to happen is the water line that's down at the Y of Gregory and Lawrence, as that fills up, that was one of the first areas where the flushing was taking place. That was releasing a lot of the water that was currently the residual water in the system, and so it was reducing pressure for any of those that actually still had water. And so as that fills up, it starts to, again, push that air out. That air, as it releases, allows for that pressure to build up with the water, makes its way on up towards Public Works. As it's doing that, it's making its way up the high streets. And so it was really interesting, I think, to be able to look at it from the outside. And and thankfully we had just an outstanding crew that just didn't give up for 34 plus hours. Nonstop. And so as that happens, the water then will then be restored to some of those areas. As that continues up Eureka, it then also, once it gets where it needs to be, then starts to backfill on the Pine Main side. Those lines then are going up towards Spring, up to the pump station. And so that would explain why the apartments would be one of the last on the system to receive water, was just because we had to get that pressure up to a certain point at that pump station before we could turn the pumps on and get that water restored. So that was really why the recharging took as long as it did, and we really minimized, I think, the issues. We have some potential issues on one or two PRVs down at the bottom of the system, but we didn't recognize or didn't see some of the same issues that we did when we dealt with this in October of 2015, something similar. And so, again, I think it was really a testament to that team effort, a lot of heads put together. So we had a loss of pressure, and that's what required the boil order. The thought there being that if you lose pressure on the system, even if there's a pinhole in any part of that system, that it could start to siphon any of the contamination around it. And so I'm just relaying all this information just so everyone knows that our water department and everybody else involved has been able to provide, because I certainly don't have all of this knowledge. So when we were recharged and back up and running, then testing samples were taken and submitted to a qualified lab. That testing then took approximately 24 hours. There's been questions about why a test would take as long as it does. It's a bacterial culture that's taken, and so that's the reason. That testing, if it came back negative, was required for us to then share with the state. The state would then authorize the city to lift that boil order. And so those test results did come back on Sunday afternoon negative, and so then we went ahead and moved forward with that lift. Part of the question, I guess, that came about was specific to Prospectors Run. Prospectors Run did not lose any water or pressure during the event. That is just because, and solely because, that system, given their 90,000 gallon tank that was full at the time, which gave them about 4 days of capacity there based on historical use, they continue to have gravity feed come down from a source that wasn't part of the break and wasn't connected to any potential contamination. And so there were similar questions, and that was, for instance, why is there one location on Main Street that, again, didn't lose pressure or maintained water, where the county building didn't have water, or maybe Century, for instance, is one on Main Street. Part of that is the location, and largely about infrastructure, so as where that water is and how much of that residual pressure is still there. If you were to take one of the, let's say, City Hall, for instance, we didn't lose water, we lost some pressure, but we're also still able to have the pressure that's pushing all the way down, roughly 50,000 gallons or so, within 2 lines that go up Spring Street to the pump station. There's a 6-inch and a 12-inch line that go up there. So that's all still pushing back towards this area. Now, Century, on the other hand, if they're pulling off of Eureka, they may not have that. But that's not really why Century or the county building didn't have water. Some elect to actually turn off their water at the source when that shutoff occurs, mainly because if they wait until they get positive pressure back, then they minimize the issues with air in the lines within their building. And so part of it is infrastructure related, but part of it's also just the operational strategy of some of these property owners. So it varied, I guess needless to say, throughout the city. But as I start to pull up some of the handmade mapping, just to kind of go through some visuals, turn it over to Jack and Jason to provide additional information where needed, and also for any specific questions as we show some of the visuals. So I guess I should say, are there any questions so far? Would it be okay if you kept it back here?
Yeah.
I think that's okay. Actually, move forward. I'll just bring it up here.
Why did we not use this event as a time to fix the break that we have showing at Eureka?
It's a great question. So that was something that we discussed, the question being the known issue there at the intersection of Main, Eureka, and Lawrence. Why didn't we take the time at that point to go ahead and make the repair? So JBS, the contractor that was on site, initially said they were interested and willing to do so. As time got later, and as we went through this particular repair, and noted that there are it's kind of, you end up seeing what you have and what you might need after you've already exposed it. And so it was really trying to get everything back online and not compromising the rest of the system by maybe opening something up and prolonging the boil order. And the reason why we also were a little bit more hesitant was because we believe in working and discussing with the contractor that we may be able to do an above ground bypass and not actually have to shut down the entire system to do that repair. Now that's still subject to I think the exploration, but that right now is the plan. So we didn't need it to be shut off in order to do that was the problem. So up here is a water treatment plant. Again, this is not as technical as I know that these guys are used to, but I do know that it was helpful, at least for myself and others as a layperson. So the treatment plant is here. We have that 750 million gallon tank there. Going down Eureka over to Prospectors, this is the depiction of the pump station for that unit. Then up to the 90,000 gallon tank. And so that's really what was feeding back here, even though we were shut off. We're shut off right about here.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
And this is where that break was. And so Public Works here, H Street, Eureka, Prosser, back to Eureka down there. And so this is where that repair was made. And then continuing on from Eureka, now some of these areas right now are going to be some new issues that popped up as everything was brought back on. And so these are going to be some of the issues we're going to be addressing through the contractors we have on site and some other contractors we brought in. But that's at Academy and Eureka. And then again, as we were discussing earlier, building that pressure back this way, then to build up onto the high streets, opening up the hydrants in these locations to be able to purge some of that air and then draw that water up. And so we would have, where Main Street is here, those are the two lines going up Spring. And you get down here to Gregory and it stops there. This is the Packard Street, Gregory Street issue that we're dealing with right now. And then potential issues with PRV there at D Street and Lawrence, and then also off of Casey, the backside of Casey coming down. Those are going to be some issues that the guys have dealt with in the past as far as excess pressure at some of the residential units. And so that's just kind of showing a little bit about how that water flows and down to the water. And this was the point where I think the initial hydrant was open to release some of that water and start to purge the system and start refilling again. And then working up Spring Street and Roworth here, going into Spring Street into the pump station. And this is the water going up there. This builds up with that pressure to go over to Tony.
Thanks.
Thanks, thank you. To her home. And so, again, this is very elementary, and I'll say that because I drew it. But
Better than a lot of the maps we have.
Yeah, it is one of our better maps. It is one of our better maps. I know exactly what you're talking about.
But we're using the opportunity also to make some improvements. I think as each time we're going through any of these issues, we're learning more about the system, identifying more of the infrastructure, and then working with the contractor to map them out appropriately and professionally. And so, and then also creating the inventory so that we can get an idea of what we have in the way of valves, what the ages are. I think jokingly, but also a lot of truth to it, is that while this one may have been a 1991 valve, we have some lines that could be 80, 100 years old. You've heard in the past we've had wooden pipes, some clay pipes, and we made pass them out there. But in a nutshell, just wanted to be able to give you a sequence of events and then also just illustrate a little bit of how it's designed and help us all to understand a little bit as to why it might take long. Gravity feeding and pressurizing uphill without a booster pump is not really done in many areas. And so it's amazing that it works the way that it does and that it's worked as long as it has. We know we'll still have a number of challenges with the infrastructure ahead of us, but learning more about it, I think, will allow us to be more proactive in some of those plans, which the guys are working 7 days a week to come up with. So just really wanted to, on behalf of staff, really just wanted to say thank you and appreciate everything that every single person who worked on this directly and indirectly did. And also, I think I'd be remiss if we didn't say just how much we appreciate council and specifically a lot of the support that we received, knowing that during these times not everybody's happy. There can be a lot of criticism out there and sometimes from an uninformed position, but I think that Mayor Fay and I know Jack and the rest of the council supported staff throughout, knew everything that was going on at every minute, and really just provided us with the support that we needed and the understanding that we were doing everything we possibly could as humanly possible given our resources. And so we thank you. Couldn't have done that without you. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to questions, I think, for Jack and Jason, since they will have more detail for you.
Good job.
Good job.
Any questions?
Any questions?
I've got a couple comments. First off, I think I got to learn a lot about the city in this process as well. This illustration is even more helpful, but I had the opportunity to stop by the break site and also City Hall. And I was very impressed. This was not an event that happened under optimal circumstances. That might be one reason why we couldn't take care of that other repair. Trying to do it in the middle of a snowstorm is not the best time to try to take care of that sort of situation. But I was impressed with not only the water department's response and how quickly it found that leak within a couple of hours. Did not. You went by at one time and it was good, and an hour later you had water coming out of it.
Yeah, I drove past it about 6:40, and I got a call from a gentleman in Public Works at about 6:45, and said, "You have water coming 4 feet out of the ground." So.
That could have been out there unnoticed for hours. It would have had a huge impact on our ability. But not only the water department, but JBS, I thought, was timely and creative. They couldn't get their equipment up because of the snowstorm, and found an alternate to bring equipment in and deal with that. Out of the box thinking and oriented towards what does it take to get the job done. And that extended on down into City Hall when I came down here, and it was clearly all hands on deck. People were flying around this building, taking care of business. I saw Ray and Zeke out there putting up well notices and convening meetings about how we're going to do this and how we're going to do that, and what about this eventuality, and some really creative thinking about what if we go ahead and hyperchlorinate the tank right now while we're not using it, so that we don't have to wait to do that in order to sanitize the lines after the break is actually fixed. You probably saved a couple of hours just with that pre-thinking. That was fantastic. All this is getting done while Public Works is out there trying to deal with an unusual snowstorm that had light snow on the top and heavy snow on the bottom, leaving a glaze of very slippery surface that had to be dealt with in the advanced thinking on your department part. of making certain that crews were rested and ready to go when the full storm hit, because you were already resting people shortly after it started. That allowed us to have snow plowing throughout the entire event and not have to take a stop, because you have regulations that you have to meet where plow drivers can't be looking into the snow for hour after hour after hour. You have to take a break at some point. That was fantastic. To go back to the events here at City Hall, admin was still putting out packets, and they were fully engaged and involved, and City Hall did not close down, so it was available for people to come by, pick up water and whatever else needed to be done with city business. And I think a big shout out is necessary for the volunteer fire department. Those people were out in the snow for extended hours, making sure roads were closed and nobody was driving through and hazarding the work site, as well as getting the system back up and operating, recharging it and bleeding valve. So an impressive show all around, and I think, Daniel, you're to be commended for your leadership in the whole process, as well as every
Showing clap, because staying
Thank
there
you.
overnight, giving people water and stuff like that, that means a lot.
Well, thank you, but I really, and this isn't just one of those opportunities to say no.
Yeah.
But it
No, but it
really, I
wasn't
mean, I
you.
was only here because there were other people to be here with, and I was just there to be a support, and they did all the heavy lifting every second of the way, thinking about things that I don't think some of us would have thought about, because they aren't requirements, but you know, whether it's the portable toilets or water, and going to great lengths to make all that happen. I mean, I'm just very excited and thankful and proud to be a part of this crew and of this team. Great community effort, fantastic.
Thank you very much.
I'll even say that some are actually, even after everything was said and done, I know Ray was working on, hope you don't mind, driving with his daughter, who now has her permit, and having to cut that short to get back home to post the notice, and so
I think it just
every little bit
speaks
was
volumes on what our city can do. I think that for how quick it happened, how quick, I mean, even city council, we were notified, letting people know, we came up here to see what was happening. I mean, there was not one person in the community that was trying to not figure something out. Like the staff, you guys were up here, you guys were around the table up there, like Jack said, answering our questions, answering the community's questions. I mean, we still have cases of water down there, and I think that's just speaks volumes about like really what Central City's about, and the staff and how everything works. So kudos to everyone that was here, everybody that, you know, from the volunteer fire department to Ray, Zeke, you know, Reba, Jason, Jack, everybody. I mean, I was really impressed.
Reba helped you?
She was there, she was working, everybody was working, the ladies were working too. Everybody would, no, when you came into the City Hall, everyone was up and moving and talking about it and working and answering questions. You would drive by City Hall in the front, if someone with Public Works was out there and someone in the community was asking questions, they were answering those questions. And like I said, it just speaks volumes about what Central City's about and our sense of community, so kudos.
Fantastic. Good. And are there any open issues?
So, not really any open issues with that piece of the repair. Everything's going well there. Just some of the other stressed areas. So we'll be taking care of those, and hopefully Sam won't have to question whether or not he can move a porta potty again. I think that was interesting. So I think we should be good.
One of the areas, the stressed areas, years ago when it first happened, I was able to get some new PRVs put in place, and actually it was Jack's thinking. He's young, you know. I mean, it was Jack's thinking how to essentially reconfigure a PRV vault up on D Street, and that brought localized pressures down from like approximately 165 PSI to 99 PSI. So we've got that area contained, maybe?
It
Yeah,
is better than it was, yeah, it will be permanently repaired.
Yes.
Good work.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then we will now open the public forum for anything that's on the agenda. I don't have anyone signed up. Does anyone want to speak to anything on the agenda? Dave?
Mr. Mayor, council, staff, David Jocelyn, 344 East First High Street. I come as a resident of Central City tonight. I'll keep it real short because really I just wanted to say thank you on the whole water main break and especially the information that got out there really quickly. Much, much appreciated. If I had one criticism, it would be, I think you reined in the sources of communication for the back end of it on telling people, hey, turn your water back on and flush those valves. And great instructions. And I think what would have resolved some of that is on the front end of that communication, just adding a little tag, keep watch on the website and, wherever you're going to intend to post the information going forward. But I mean, it's really a small criticism because it was a fantastic job and I sure appreciated it. So, thank you.
Great. If that's it, we'll close the public forum and move on to action items, new business. We have resolution number 1903, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Central, Colorado Telephonic Participation Policy. Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. There's been a recent event specifically affecting one of our council members, and so this issue was brought up, and so Marcus has proposed a solution to that, and specifically looking at the rule of procedure, and so I'll turn it over to Marcus at this point just to discuss some of those specific points.
Thank you, Daniel. Mayor, members of council, this resolution adopts a telephonic participation policy. So as Daniel mentioned, he contacted me when the city became aware that Alderman Larada may not be able to attend the next couple of meetings, but she's hoping to attend by telephone. And what I told Daniel is that's something that I think is increasingly allowed in communities in Colorado and in fact in certain communities that we represent. But what I advised him is that it's always smart to have a telephonic participation policy in place, because you don't want to allow it in one situation and then not allow it and be making ad hoc decisions on who can do it and when. And you surely don't want the ability of a city council person to participate via telephone to be abused. So what this what this policy does is really specify the circumstances under which a member of city council can participate in regular and special meetings by telephone. And highlights of this policy include the following. Telephonic participation is intended to be an infrequent or occasional substitution for physical attendance. You may not participate in executive sessions of city council by telephone. The city council may, by majority vote of the quorum present, declare a council member's repeated use of the telephonic participation privilege to be excessive, and then deny a council member's privilege to use the telephone for a specific meeting or meetings in the future. Participation must permit by telephone must permit clear, uninterrupted, and two-way communication for the participating council member. And importantly, I think because if you're participating via telephone, you miss the opportunity to view written materials that may be presented by city staff or by members of the public that are present. And also, I think you really miss the opportunity to pick up on important nonverbal cues and other information. I have language in this policy that says that we would allow a council person to maintain the telephone connection during a quasi-judicial hearing, but not actually participate as a voting member on that issue. So if you have a specific land use application or some other quasi-judicial matter, that council person that may be on the telephone can listen in, but that council person would not be allowed to vote on that. So, and I know this is the first time you've seen the policy tonight, but again, I think we're trying, the intent here is to get something in place so that we can permit Mayor Pro Tem Larada to participate until her health allows her to be back here full time. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I do think that this is it's a fair policy and something that makes sense. And again, we're not expecting, at least we're hoping that you know, all of you don't start attending by telephone, because I think it's really important. Obviously, that's why we put in the policy. It's intended to be infrequent. But again, we thought it's smart to have a policy in place, so I'm happy to answer your questions.
Is Judy listening right now? No.
Telephonically, no, but she may be real time on the recording. She has been doing that.
Okay. So, explain to me why we don't want to give voting rights with this?
We are giving voting rights for if there was a motion on an administrative matter, or if there was a motion on the consent agenda, or if there was an ordinance that was under consideration, for example, the snow removal ordinance that's on first reading. So if there was a motion to approve an ordinance on first reading, that council member could participate. However, I think that if you're in a quasi-judicial matter where there's a land use application and there's likely going to be a presentation by staff that includes maps or potentially other diagrams or other documentary evidence that an applicant is presenting, and that individual who's sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity, meaning sitting as a judge of that application, can't see that evidence, I don't think it's fair to the applicant to allow that individual to vote.
And we can't make sure that whoever's going to be telephonically involved has those materials in advance?
Correct. Right, because often there's materials that are presented by members of the public or the applicant that are not part of the council package.
Or we could either use those.
Any questions about this?
No, I think it's clear.
I don't know what that. Certain.
So how are we gonna have like a big phone here, and then it's gonna be able to be audible, where she's gonna be able to hear people in the audience and people, I mean, are people gonna come up and talk into the phone, or?
So we have a conference call hub that has a speaker on it, and so we likely would try to see if we can get it as close to the dais as possible. Usually it sits somewhere around here if we're using it in this
We've had
this
them
room.
upstairs, we used it up at the executive session.
Yes, and so it'll be likely that that you all will be able to hear and communicate with that person, but I'm not sure right now. We'll take a look to see if we can pipe that audio feed as it comes back to you all through our system here. That would be a plus if we could do it, but I think that'll be our initial start.
So, can we get a motion?
I'll move approval of resolution 1903, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Central Colorado adopting a policy regarding telephonic participation during city council meetings.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye. I I moved aye. I was tardy in
Tardy.
suggesting.
I seconded.
Because I thought my job was done having read it.
Motion carries unanimously. Okay, next we have ordinance 1901 on the first reading. Request for issue ordinance 1901. Ordinance establishes more robust snow removal requirements for public sidewalks and includes an administrative enforcement process.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So as Council is aware, I know we had a work session on this topic just earlier today at 1 o'clock, so I'll recap some elements from that. But as you're aware, the regulations in place now require snow removal on the sidewalk 6 hours after the snow event ends, and the obligation for that snow removal falls to the adjacent property owner. Though our current regulations don't clearly define the enforcement mechanism associated with that, so that's why this draft ordinance is before you. So some highlights from this draft ordinance is the 6 hour would still be in place, so that the sidewalk would need to be clear after 6 hours, but it does have language in there saying that the sidewalk would be continuously cleared throughout the snow event. An example for that would be from Friday, where we had snow for 24 hours, so it's in everyone's best interest for public safety to ensure the sidewalk is continuously cleared and that we're not waiting a full 6 hours. Though, as a point of clarification, any code enforcement action or clearing of the sidewalk would have to wait until after the 6 hour period. The notice associated with this would be first at the beginning of the snow season, so beginning of October, to anyone that would be potentially responsible for clearing sidewalk. That would be a property owner, a tenant, and the like of adjacent properties. So we first send out a notice informing them of this regulation and your obligation. And then after the first snow event, let's say someone doesn't clean their sidewalk after 6 hours, then we would be providing a notice at that 6 hour time period. It would be either posting it on the property or emailing, saying that you did not clear the sidewalk, you're obligated to do so. And then the city would be, through the city manager, would be authorized to then clear the sidewalk, and there would be fines and penalties associated with that. First fine, as proposed, is $100. Second violation would be $250, and the third and any further violations in the snow season would be $500. The notice, the second notice for after the 6 hour snow event would only be one time, so that would be all the notice they would receive. There would be the initial letter and then the notice after the snow event. The violation as it's proposed in the ordinance would be a first lien recorded against the property. And that's some of the highlights from the staff report and the discussion. Now I'll run through some of the points of discussion that we had with the work session. As staff, what we're hoping for, and I'm sure the city attorney will want to add to this, but as staff, what we're looking for is clear direction from the majority of council regarding the draft ordinance, if this is acceptable as prepared, if not, what revisions you would want to see, so that those revisions could be incorporated in the second reading, which would be as soon as February 5th. Some of the comments that were raised during the work session earlier today, I'm just doing a summary of these. Reducing the violations for residential properties, so cutting them in half. So it would be 50, 100, and 250 for residential properties. The thought there would be by using the residential zoning districts as the defining line. There would be some residential uses in the downtown core HDG or GGG zoning, but there could be a number of mixed uses in those zones in the future. So staff is proposing, if council wants to do a reduction for residential properties, that it's by the zoning district. So an example of that would be up Eureka Street. As you pass the courthouse, those sidewalks would be in residential districts, and any fines would be lowered. That was one comment that was made earlier today. Addressing hazardous events more clearly, that would be something that staff would be working closely with the city attorney on. So if there's an individual ice sheet that is within a snow event, to try to deal with that within that time period. Defining an owner's agent, so that it's a clearer process of who we're contacting. Defining a snow storage area. And then clarifying the two different notices in the requirements. And then the comment here is guidelines for how the city and city staff would be enforcing and implementing these regulations. So those are some of the highlights from the discussion. The only addition to that is the comment that I raised during the work session is, instead of having it as a first lane, that we actually put it on as on the tax bill for the next tax bill, and have it certified onto the taxes from the through the county treasurer's office. And that's something that Gilpin County has done before for violations. That would be something that staff would need to work closely with the city attorney on that. So I stand for any questions, but again, we're looking for some clarification. I believe Marcus probably has something to add to this.
The only thing I would add is that the collection methodology that Ray is speaking about, I think, is a possibility. I mean, the total amount of the unpaid penalties or fines that would be accrued to a specific property could become an assessment lien. That lien is then certified to the Gilpin County Treasurer, and as long as we add language to the ordinance that says that it's our intent that the assessment lien be certified to the county treasurer and collected with property taxes, that could be done. Now we'll have to confirm with the county treasurer's office what deadline they would need. My understanding is that they typically will want that in the November timeframe, because tax bills for the following year will go out, are usually finalized during December so that they can be mailed in January. And as you know, taxes in Colorado are due to be paid in full no later than April 30th. Property owners always have the ability to pay in 2 installments, with the first half due by the end of February and the second half due by June 15th. So if we were to do this type of collection process, we would really be certifying the fines in the November timeframe for fines that would have occurred in the previous snow season. So there will be a delay of probably 18 months between the date that the penalties are imposed and when the city ultimately collects that money. But that, I think, is why a 10% administrative penalty is usually imposed on top of that to cover some of these administrative costs of collection. But that is something that we can look at. And if that's something that council wants to see in this, that we can add some language to this ordinance that sets that out as the collection methodology.
I think that would be important for us to do that, so we won't be waiting for a lien on the property, waiting for the property to potentially sell or not. That sounds like that would be even longer for us to get the fees and the money back. 18 months versus it could be 5 years or never, you know, that someone may sell the property. So 18 months just sounds a lot quicker, because we're going to be using our own staff hours and staff to clear the snow if they choose not to clear, or potentially if they don't have their own agent that they can assign. The agent thing is like, I see how that could be beneficial, like it's giving an option of owner, tenant, and agent. I just see fears of if we had someone assigning an agent and then we're trying to track down the agent, and the agent may have moved, or the agent may not be working with that individual anymore to clear snow. I could see that being an issue, and then staff hours trying to track down the individual. So I would prefer it staying to a tenant and owner, because a tenant would most likely be present, and an owner, I mean, you know, at least we know who they are.
Yeah, and I think that if we have a problem, commercial property, for example, that's not doing this, and we provide, you know, we've provided written notice, and ultimately we have penalties and fines, we likely would provide notice to that corporation or LLC's agent for service of process that's identified on the Secretary of State's website. So in addition to mailing notice to the actual business address, a lot of LLCs or corporations will maintain a registered agent, you know, a PO box in and we would send it to that address as well. I think we would want to make sure that we would send a notice so that
To all parties.
Yeah, to hopefully to ensure that somebody's receiving it and understands that if this specific fine is not paid by a date certain, we're going to, you know, proceed to certify it as a assessment lien against the property to be collected property taxes.
I guess that's just one of my concerns. If you have like an agent and that person say, hey, it's me, you know, I want Jackie to scrape my sidewalks. I've moved away. Jackie is actually not doing those sidewalks. And then we're sending, basically saying about taxes or, you know, repercussions. And you're like, I never really said I wanted to be that person's agent. They assigned me as their agent. You know what I mean? I just see issues with that. I think we could be chasing people, because I mean, we're asking the owner or tenant to assign an agent. I mean, they could tell us whoever.
Do we have agents?
Homeowners gonna have agents?
Do we specifically?
No, but that's just the conversation we
agent
had about
references?
agents. That's my
Agents?
issues with that information.
Where's the reference to agent in that
Well,
ordinance?
during the works that we were talking, during the session.
That's not.
So the way that that one section reads, and I believe it was 11.630, is it right? Or maybe it was 11.620. But there was, I think we had responsible party, and there was some discussion about who had that responsibility and liability. And so I think that actually had 11.620, looks like it's in that second, third line. And so it would be a responsible party. Let's see, what was it in the, oh no, I'm sorry. The definition above that in subsection B of 11.610, responsible party or responsible parties refers to every person who owns, controls, or has a possessory interest in any building, structure, real property, etc., whether as owner, tenant, occupant, or otherwise. So it was that discussion about the otherwise, would that encompass maybe an agent, or because some of these properties have a real estate agent or someone else who might be here, and I think that was where the discussion was, that if we open it up to, say, a phone tree for a number of different people that might be associated with the property, it could be a little bit more difficult to get compliance than if we just kept it very clear that they need to take on that responsibility. I think that's where we were at.
So a homeowner that has, like, say somebody lives up Eureka and little Bobby's gonna be shovel her walks for her. Is he gonna be her agent? And then, you know, homeowners have agents.
No, I think I misheard the question about agent. If we get to a position where we're gonna be sending notice regarding a potential lien to a commercial property owner, I'm going to copy that person's agent for service of process that's identified in the Secretary of State's database. I think that responsible party ultimately, historically, it's always been, it's the owner that's responsible, right? And I think it's the owner or tenant, I think is what we're going for here. So if there's an agency type relationship and somebody has delegated the responsibility to Bobby in your example, or you in your example, Frank, I don't care, right? They can tell me that, I don't care. The responsibility is the owner's responsibility.
So you'll be going
And
to
if
the
they're,
homeowner.
we're gonna be going after the owner.
Well, in the notice is the ordinance process. We have a public hearing. It's published before the public hearing. And so there's a notice. Now, I think we can, I'm sure there'll be something in the newspaper about this. So there will be some information out there. Now, we could choose to notify all the property owners, in some other way. But the notice, when we go to post that they have failed to clear within 6 hours after cessation, then, that's the first notice. And that's on a per season. Then there would be a second, which would then carry with it a different fine, and third and so on. But there's no other notice provision after that, right, the way that it's written.
So these guys, like the guy that has the Pythias building, is he gonna be notified before we go through this process and saying this is what's gonna happen? I mean, you're gonna, between now and the second hearing, reading, will these people be,
No.
so,
It's a requirement that exists on the books. The only thing that's
Yeah.
changing is the way that we're going to do it, and the fact that it will have fines and fees. It'll have some teeth, is what everybody's been asking for. So it shouldn't be something new to somebody who is here taking care of their property, whether it's directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
I think that's been the biggest issue, is that for those that are here and engaged, it's not a problem. For those that are not, they have to have some sort of message. If they don't get the message through the means that we're proposing here, or what ultimately is approved by council, then you hope that they'll get the message as that enforcement continues. Now, whether that in fact will happen, we don't know, which is why internally, operationally, we still have to be prepared to go ahead and remove the snow, just on the assumption that maybe they don't. At least that's the way it's proposed. It's up to council.
And is this falling under Zeke's?
The enforcement piece?
Yeah.
So the enforcement piece is technically myself and my designee, the way that it's written.
Okay.
And we are moving towards having a code enforcement officer. And so that person, I hope by next winter will be known, and that will be part of it, because it'll also be very important for us to have something similar as we move forward in other ordinances that I know that council is asking for, which is, on upkeep of the facade and things like that, so.
I now regret having mentioned the possibility of an agent. My intent was to find an easy mechanism to identify someone locally for an absent owner. For that absent owner to notify the city, to say, this person is the person you should contact, who I'm in direct communications with. I'm still the responsible party, but get a hold of this person, and we can get the snow removed more quickly, rather than waiting to go through the more bureaucratic process of a written notice. So I think you probably got that. It's probably an item that you do as a part of implementation of the ordinance, and doesn't necessarily need to be in the ordinance. So I regret the last 10 minutes of conversation. Sorry I brought it up.
in the meantime, so between now and next reading, there's still buildings that have snow on the sidewalks, and probably have more snow on the sidewalks. So who's going to remove that? That's just gonna stay there until, the first, when this ordinance finally gets passed, or, what do we do about the snow that's built up on the Pythias building and in front of Tebow's place? And, is this gonna sit there, and the guy's gonna hope nobody slips and he gets a lawsuit, or,
So a couple different things. I think that we could reach out to those property owners and let them know that there is somebody who's now taking care of some of those other properties that previously weren't, and maybe he will be available to.
So we are gonna contact them first, then,
Well,
before the reading.
So technically, all we have right now as far as enforcement capability is what's currently on the books. And so, short of that, if there aren't any other neighbors, or if the owner is not gonna do the work, then that could be something that, again, this gets back to the city and what we do with our resources. We've already, I think, established and had concurrence that we won't be taking any of the staff off of the roadways to do that. But if it's something that we go and take care of, it'll be something that we do at our expense, because we don't have the ability to recoup those costs right now.
So what I'm saying is, right now, do we contact that guy now and say, we're going to move ahead with an ordinance? In the meantime, you got snow on your, what do you want to do about it?
I think we as a city can do it. Also, anybody, whether it's the bid or any of the neighbors or any interested party within the city, also has similar abilities to get contact information. We get ours, mainly, I think, through the county, looking at the property record cards. And so that's how we would attempt to get in touch with them, because we don't always have good contact information for all of them. But I would encourage not only ourselves, but any other interested parties to contact them and say, please do this, know that this is coming, and hey, by the way, Joe or Jane, they're interested. Bob is interested.
Little Bobby,
Well,
he's gonna have a lot of work.
Okay, so, all right, so we want to move on here with, you want to do this, Matt?
Well, I've got a couple of other comments I'd like to make. Going back to the tax sale, I'm wondering if it would confuse things if we did both. If we had a lien process as well as a tax assessment. And my thinking is that if it's gonna be 18 months before you can get this up for the tax sale, potential exists for the property to be sold before that 18 months, and then the lien would kick in, and you recover through that lien process rather than the tax sale.
And either or.
Well, do both.
Is there a way to?
So you have a lien in place while you're waiting for the tax sale to happen. That may confuse things legally for both issues, so your comment.
Yeah, I think that I think that I prefer the assessment lien. I mean, it's still a
I do
lien
too.
on the property that can be collected in the same manner as general property taxes. And frankly, if the property is going to be sold between the date that the assessment lien is perfected and recorded against the property, and the general rule is that as of the date of sale, the taxes are prorated.
Okay.
If I'm the buyer of the property and you get the certificate of taxes due from the county treasurer, and it's showing that there's an assessment lien that's been recorded, I'm going to ask the seller to pay that, because but for the seller's negligence in failing to keep the snow and ice off the sidewalk, the assessment lien wouldn't. So I think that that's something that the parties can
Do with one process.
Yeah, can handle that at closing, and those costs would be prorated accordingly. But I think there's more certainty, especially with the commercial properties, with getting those monies collected, because you very, very rarely see an occupied property go to tax sale, right? I mean, if taxes are delinquent, an investor can come in and bid on in order to bid on those taxes, they need to pay that in full, including the assessment lien. And then
Here we
they're
have a lot of occupied properties that go to tax sale and then get redeemed.
Well, they get redeemed.
Regularly.
They get redeemed. Well, let me back up. You don't see a lot of properties where the delinquent taxes are paid for 3 full years before you can have a treasurer's deed issued.
Right.
And the
Right.
property is actually conveyed. So
Right.
But you're right. You do see properties go to tax sale, but they are ultimately redeemed prior to the end of that 3-year period.
Mhm.
So I think I prefer the assessment lien as the collection mechanism.
Okay.
And let me add to that, in that before property is sold, they do check with the county treasurer, and so if there is anything pending, they would relay that on the assessment that would be forthcoming.
Good, doesn't make it less complicated.
Yes.
When I look at an ordinance, I try to look at it with a fresh set of eyes, as if I were reading it for the first time and I was looking for specific information and how I'd find that specific information. I'm gonna suggest that right after section 11.6.20, duty to keep sidewalks clear of snow and ice, that you created another section that deals specifically with fines. Fines and penalties before you get to notice an abatement, so that you have a process. This is the requirement to keep the sidewalk clear. This is what's happening if you don't. The first step is going to be you're going to get a citation. Then the next step is going to be notice an abatement and how the abatement procedure works with the certification of unpaid amounts and that sort of thing. Someone reading it and looking for, okay, what's my liability under this, I think would find that information faster. And it may create the impression or the visibility of the teeth that we're looking for to try to encourage people to act timely on their sidewalk.
So basically the information from like this page.
Well, right now, we just talk about
There's no
the snow
numbers.
removal fines and penalties will be established by resolution. That's in the middle of notice of abatement.
Mhm.
I'm suggesting that's a different subject, to create a different section for it, instead of incorporating it with notice and abatement. And then later on, when you go to collection, you also mentioned that fines and penalties can be included in the assessment. That's why it should appear before the notice and abatement process.
And I think usually we put them on, the reason I think we usually have our fees on the schedule is, or resolutions, just because sometimes they change from year to year, but this one doesn't seem like it's gonna be changing with some CPI, so it probably can be included a little bit more easily than in some
Well, I
others.
think you can keep that language in there, into this fines section. You notice that it's going to be established on a resolution as council sees fit, so that you have that flexibility to change that fee if you want to.
Yeah, I think I understand your comment. I mean, we're really moving that language up and establishing a fines and penalties.
Yeah,
section.
and maybe expanding on the fine process or fine requirement, so it's not just in the middle of a paragraph.
I guess I'm wondering, should we be incorporating it in here or passing the resolution with those fees and incorporating them on the same day?
Well, I think you do that, but as I say, if I'm looking at what's gonna happen if I don't shovel my sidewalk, and I pull this ordinance out of the code and try to find that answer, I have to look pretty far before I'm gonna find that I'm gonna get a fine. Whereas I think a fine is probably the first step in enforcement. The first thing that someone could expect to have happen is within a day of not having complied with the ordinance, somebody's gonna show up with a citation.
Stick it in the front, and you will be fined.
In that section.
I'm concerned about residences. You know, I noted in the work session that I think that there is a more greater expectation in the commercial area and justifies a higher fine than in a residential area, because the commercial area, when it's left unkept, it creates a liability for the entire city, whereas the residence is a more smaller impact. You know, I am very concerned about creating a situation where some of our residents just don't have the ability to get out there and shovel a walk in a timely basis or do it regularly. And we're going to create, make them criminals instead of solving a problem. So I'm assuming that Lawrence, the residences on Lawrence are residential, or are they commercial zone?
So those would be in the HDG, I believe. I'd have to verify the map, but I believe it would still be commercial zoning there.
So that's problematic for me, and I understand the whole thing is problematic. People walking down to the Grand Z use that sidewalk. The people that own the houses along that sidewalk don't really have a financial benefit out of the people walking down that sidewalk to get to the Grand Z. So I think it's a little unfair to require those residences to maintain a sidewalk to the benefit of someone who's going to be gaining a financial advantage off of those. And I don't have a solution for that. Maybe the solution is for us to hire someone from the city to take care of that section. It's the only one I can think of that'd be affected that way. But I don't want to create a liability for a homeowner that's out of proportion for their responsibility.
Same thing would apply if I'm parking in the tower lot and I'm coming down to the tower house. And there's still residential parking sidewalks and I'm coming down.
Mhm.
You know, so it's not exclusive to that. I understand what you're.
Well, it's exclusive from the commercial standpoint and the gaming standpoint. When you do that, walking down those streets, the Opera Association is very responsible for
Right.
maintaining those.
Yeah.
And they have done that. And I still see that as a different circumstance than those residences on Lawrence.
So now you're just gonna be pinpointing little areas where these rules don't apply to you. And maybe way up in Eureka, these rules don't apply to you. And we're gonna be mapping out little areas where you're not responsible at all for showing your walks in front of your house.
Didn't say this was gonna be easy.
Well,
I
just
think
say-
there's
I don't
a,
think we can cherry pick
I
on
don't
who
think,
it applies
you
to and who
know,
it
a
doesn't
lot of
apply
people
to.
rent, and the people, the landlords, you know, if they can't get their renters to do their own walks, then, you know, like the landlords, just like some guy who's 80 years old and owns a abandoned building, you know, he's not gonna come out and shovel his walk because he's 80 years old, but I'm not gonna give him a break because he's, you know, lives in Chicago or wherever, and he can't get out here to do it, he's gonna hire somebody to do it. And if you own a house, and, you know, you show me your walk, or get somebody to do it, you know, I mean, you know, you start putting like little areas where these rules don't apply, then you're really, you know, I think it just gets really messy. And this whole thing was just, to me, it was just like you got like about 4 areas that are problem areas, and we're making this huge thing out of, you know, just those, you know, get those 4 areas to take care of this stuff, you know? And now we're getting into, you know, this section of town doesn't apply, you know. These people, if you're over 80 or if you're over a senior citizen, you don't have to show your walks. You know, if you're handicapped, you don't have to show your walks. So,
My
you know,
concern
we end up
was-
with an ordinance like, you know, 40 pages.
if that's zoned resident, if that's zoned commercial, then the higher fine schedule applies. If it's residential, then a lower fine applies, and I think that's reasonable, to not ask as much of those.
But we're gonna have residential on Main Street. That's the goal, as we've been talking about, and converting those into apartments. If people decide to do that and we get those buildings built, people have talked about that.
There may be residents in
Yeah,
those
I'm just
buildings,
saying,
but
but
it
in
isn't
general,
residential.
I know, but I'm just saying, but like he said, that that may be commercial.
I don't think it matters what the
So-
issue is, it's who the tenant is. If you're a home, it's a residential fine. If you're a commercial building, it's a commercial fine, right?
That was my concern with Ray's suggestion, using zoning to determine what's residence and what's commercial.
No, but
And if that's HDE, then it's commercial.
It's gotta be based on the address, and is it a commercial address or is it a residential address?
That
Well,
works
I
for me.
think the only thing that we'll have to do a little bit differently there is, there are, and I can think of one right now by Ermels, where there's residential upstairs, there's commercial downstairs.
That's what I'm.
And so, but the building's all owned by one person and has essentially one
Well, yeah,
address.
There's more than one. There's a number of commercial buildings in the city that are used residentially.
Okay, so if it's a mixed-use
Mary Bell's.
building, it defaults to commercial.
And
So
the
it's
other way
not-
we can
it's-
handle it too
it's
is
for-
maybe, you know, some sort of a, like a map, not the one we drew earlier. You know, something that, you know, highlighted portions that, the same way that we might have when we were looking at the marijuana ordinance and, different areas, and they were different colors depending on how far away they were from the city center. Not suggesting something like that, but a color-coded, version where there's gonna be some residential that are actually owned by the opera, so they're gonna be commercial because it's a corporation that owns them. But, so it oftentimes could be where it's zoned, but also who owns it and how it's used.
That sounds like 40 pages worth of stuff. That's what that sounds like. I mean, that's what I was saying earlier. I'm just
Attach a
like,
map.
we can't just say, here's a zoning map, this is this. Okay, well now, you know, they're not using the bottom part for commercial, just using the tenant part, so I guess we need to switch the fees. It just sounds like so much coming, like,
So to us, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a majority is signaling for us to move forward with one set of fines.
Well, no.
And then if it, no,
That's not what I'm.
I think if it's a house,
It's a
you
house,
know,
it's a house.
the house, like on Lawrence Street, the houses there. And if it's someone like
RMO.
Mary Bell, who had her house in the
Still
shop, and that's still a commercial
Right.
area.
Yes.
So there's any kind of commercial property that, you know, I mean, you can tell what a house is and
So
what
the
a business
use
is.
as opposed to the.
Not use, no.
zoning.
If it's the bank building in the corner and there's apartments up there, that should still be commercial property. That should still be, because it's not really a residential area, and it wasn't a residential area.
And I understand, I guess the clarification I'm looking for is in an area, let's say like Lawrence or some others, where the zoning itself could have them as a
Say-
commercial, but they're
But it's actually
using
a
it as a
house.
residential.
No, but it is a house.
Okay,
the burger joint is the house.
yes, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at is RMO and others, the structure versus the use versus the zoning. So we need to probably, for our sake, try to figure out what version of
So
it we
just
use.
for sake of clarification, I think what staff will do is use the districts, but we'll clarify to see like that area on Lawrence, whether it is indeed in HDG or if it's in the medium density residential district, and then we can bring that back on second reading.
Yeah.
And if there needs to be some wordsmithing in that particular block, saying this block will be treated as residential for the purpose of the fines, we can do so.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to incorporate that in the ordinance. I've been calling for a set of guidelines that would be a companion piece to this, and that the guidelines don't need to be adopted at the same time as the ordinance, but the guidelines can provide that more detail about what a residence is and how you'll enforce different aspects of this ordinance in different areas, and who's responsible for what, and what the process is, and what the staff is going to do to implement the ordinance.
I think for,
I would like
if
to
I
see it
may,
all at
just
one
as
time.
something to think about as we go through that is, I think the same way, made a great point about how the fine structure, if it were there right in someone's face when they're reading that if they know that there's a difference in treatment, possibly even in amounts, between residential and commercial, that it be there. We can add that to the guidelines as well. Because if not, the fees that we probably are looking at putting in there, if it's just one set of fees, you might get some confusion from residents thinking that they're gonna be addressed the same way.
So if you're walking, you don't have to worry about it.
That would be the best case scenario.
Easy
there's a
for
lot-
us that don't
there's a
have
lot
lots to
of-
say.
And it'll become an increasing issue, I'm sure, as time goes on, as we introduce either more sidewalks, we get into more trails and connections. So,
Okay, and then last time we were talking about this, there was some conversation up on Eureka about how the snowplows do displace some snow
talked
back
about that today.
back onto the sidewalk. What are we doing about that?
So in general, during our discussion on that, in some areas, it will be easier said than done. In other areas, it may be a lot easier, but I think the message was, and what Sam relayed was, that his crew, will continue to be encouraged to try to slow down to control the placement of the snow. But there's gonna be some of those areas where it's pretty
it's
narrow,
gonna-
and it's gonna be somewhat difficult to do
It's
that.
gonna happen, and then the people responsible for the sidewalks will still be responsible. We're not putting it on the city.
And
If
the hope
snowplows go
being,
up, and
I I live on Eureka, I shoveled my walk, city comes through, puts snow back on there, it's my responsibility again?
So one of the parts of this is if it's 6 hours after the storm has stopped, most of the time, probably almost every time, 6 hours after a snowstorm, the plowing has already been completed, and so they may only need to shovel it once.
Okay.
I'd still like to see, I think there's entirely too much emphasis on the 6 hours. And I'd like to see more emphasis on a duty to maintain the walk. So that your responsibility is to create a safe place for people to walk. And that may happen in the middle of a snowstorm. It may happen 5 days after the snowstorm when the ice starts to melt. And the snow starts to melt and you create ice. But you have a responsibility, not just shovel your walk once, 6 hours after the storm, you have to maintain it. I'd like to see a little more emphasis on that.
But we have to have some type of hours or guidelines so we can issue fines. We have
So-
to have something definite. We can't just say, well, our code enforcement person feels that this is too much snow on your sidewalk, so I am giving you a violation.
I think you can. A law enforcement officer doesn't say, this constitutes careless driving.
Well, leaving your lane is careless driving.
Oh,
That's right. That's one of the
Speeding
parameters
too
say.
fast is careless driving, so they have guidelines that says if
Well,
you
careless
leave out your
If-
lane, you're probably gonna get pulled over.
If
Hey.
we only require people to shovel their walks once, 6 hours after a storm, we're not gonna accomplish our.
But that's not what it says.
That's where the emphasis is.
But that's not what it says.
Okay, show me where it
Well, but
says.
it talks about the 6 hours, but it
Uh-huh.
also tells them that they should maintain, it does encourage people to maintain. It just,
Where?
it just say 6 hours.
Where does it say that you will maintain?
11/6/20.
It says,
11/6/20,
such
you
persons
add.
shall remove any accumulation of snow or ice, any accumulation of snow or ice occurring during any snowfall or snowdrift as promptly and as reasonably as possible, but no later than 6 hours after the cessation of
Okay.
snowfall
So the first two sentences.
or the formation of a snowdrift.
Okay, I'll give up. Snow removal on sidewalks is not an easy issue. I clearly understand that. But, I tell you, it's gonna be a lot of heartache over this.
Well, like I said, you can't, if somebody somebody has a contractor that comes up to do their snow and they call them up. And then they say, well, you gotta come back in 2 hours and you gotta come back in 2 hours. I always think it's a bunch of crap. I mean, you can't put that on people to say, either have somebody get them a hotel room when it's snowing, so they can be out there every 2 hours, so, the snow doesn't build up.
a local.
And Mayor, Council, one of the things we'll be doing as we go through this, like we will endeavor to do in all other areas of code enforcement, is where there are gaps, where we see issues, we'll bring those back. And I think maybe might have been Alderman Heidel at the work session before this last one, said something about, we'll monitor and we'll evaluate and we'll make some changes. So if you all are hearing things, or if we discover that through our code enforcement process, we'll bring those back, and one day we might have a really good one. So,
Yeah.
that's the hope.
I have nothing further.
Anyone else? Do you have a motion? Anyone else?
No motion, no business.
Nobody like this motion, or we just pass on it?
I think we should, no.
No, we have to vote on it anyway, so.
If it moves to the second
First
reading.
Okay.
It's first reading, let's just go.
I propose a motion, move to approve ordinance 1901, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Central Colorado, amending certain provisions of Chapter 11 of the Municipal Code and adding a new Article 6 to Chapter 11 or 2, titled Snow Removal, concerning the requirement to remove snow and ice from city sidewalks. Further move that the second reading of the public hearing on the ordinance is scheduled for Tuesday, February 5th, 2019, at 7 p.m. to be held in these council chambers.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously on first reading. Okay, staff updates.
Mayor, council, aside from just one update about the publication for second reading public hearing, that'll be in this Thursday's newspaper, so that way some of that information is out. Other than that, you have some staff reports in your packet, and we'll stand for any questions you may have.
I have a question on the consultant hired to find and obtain outside grant funding. How much is we spending on that? Is that part of the budget?
Yes, it was part of the budget, the contract that city council approved a couple weeks ago for Dion Wolfenberger.
Okay. All right.
Nothing new.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's move on to some council comments. Fellow council folks, any comments?
I do,
Let's hear
but
it.
I started last time, so.
Well, then, start it again.
Okay. I want to commend the staff for moving so quickly on those comments the last time about snow removal. Putting together the meeting with the building owners in such a short period of time, I thought was well done. I think it was a productive meeting, although it was a little too predictable about the results. And I'd like to talk some more about what responsibility the city might be willing to accept with its own staff shoveling walks, as the building owners seem to suggest was the best solution. I think that moves us in a direction that is consistent with what we're gonna see out of the ULI report and council direction on how we're going to make improvements to the city and make this a more viable economic place to be. I think there's a lot of little steps we can take in that path. What I'd like to focus on right now is we've got a lot of trash in this town. There's a tire that's leaned up against the building right there next to the Sauer McShane building. It's been there for quite some time. There was a pallet leaning up against the back of Starlet's for a month or so before it finally got removed. There was a pallet sitting in the Belvedere. We're not paying attention to our properties. Let me use the illustration of a bank. I walk into a bank and it's clean. The inside's clean, the outside's clean, the landscaping's maintained. That's because it's a financial institution and their customers are not gonna wanna invest in that building unless it has those kinds of standards. And I suggest that casinos are financial institutions, and they may do a pretty good job of keeping the insides clean, but I still see styrofoam coffee cups and trash up and down the street that everybody can help pick up. Doesn't need to be just the persons that are standing there at the door. We can all do a better job of picking up trash, and I don't think you ever stand quite so tall as when you stoop over to pick up some trash. But a little bit of focus on that and improvements in what's been called the broken window syndrome, trying to remove ourselves from something that looks like a second thought and is more of a primary thought. And there's a property that we have control of that we could start with. And I wish Judy Laurent was here because she'd probably be dancing on the table. I think we need to do something with the Belvedere. The boarded up windows is not a good presentation. I can understand delaying painting the building because that would be premature while we're still doing work. But can't we repair a couple of windows so that it doesn't look like it's a derelict that it is?
Actually,
I'm not gonna ask for a comment now, it's just my comment.
So that was something we did bring up with Formworks, the company that's doing the design on there, is to assist us with proper, I think, replacement if necessary on the windows.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Boltra is still asking me about that parking study. Has that been completed?
One portion of that parking, so the city took on at the end of this last fiscal year, parking study to study the needs and the use of the parking around the city. In the past, there have been a number of studies that have been done by outside organizations. This is one that's been done by the city. So we started that process. The initial piece has been completed, which was to walk through and do the counts back in December. We're working with the contractor to continue that process so as not to just kind of come up with a result based on one time. So that's the time when the opera's not in session. We have other competing tourism areas, and so we'll be looking, I believe, Ray, about the summer or sometime close to the summer to do another count, and then try to get kind of a comprehensive report. So some of the initial work has been completed, but the project's not done.
Well, Ray paid $5,000 and he said he was expecting results, so.
Well, I can tell Ren now, if he's watching, that if it were to be concluded right now, I don't think that those were the results he was probably hoping for. And so I think it would be in his, as well as the city's best interest, to see it a little bit more comprehensive.
Okay, and the ULI report is coming out when?
So we are hopeful that no later than January 22nd for our meeting. Our hope was to try to get it before then. ULI representative noted that mid-January wasn't going to be possible, and so Ray said, okay, no later than the 22nd. So we have not heard back yet, but that's what we're pushing for, is as soon as possible and no later than the 22nd.
Okay. No comments. Anyone?
I did have a few people that talked to me today and yesterday. They said that we did communicate well when they kind of was finding out what was going on, when they needed to look at the website. They did want to know, since we have that, you know, the county has the Gilpin like emergency line that tells you if something's happening in Gilpin, like you can sign up for it, opt in. Some people were wondering why that didn't happen, and I'm like, I don't know really about that. I did want to know, I guess, more like, would we have to submit and say, hey, can you put this on the Gilpin County alert because we were in the county? Because some people were thinking, why didn't the county do it? Just especially because they closed the old the courthouse up there, and was closed. So they're like, well, if that was closed, why wasn't that on the Gilpin County report notifying everyone that Central City was out of water and they're closed?
So I think what I'll address, and then maybe there might be some more information from some county representatives, although that may be unfair for me to push off. But when it comes to reverse 911, one of the issues, and I'll admit that I was one of those that noticed it, and others did as well, that there's been a change from one system over to another, and it was my responsibility to register with the new system, and so I was part of the old system, and so I didn't get that call. I initially had a similar question because the E911 or the reverse 911 actually did go out. It's just that it only reached
Well, I
some of
opted
those.
in and I didn't get mine. That's why when,
Oh.
so I had opted
That I don't
in,
know.
what, 2 weeks ago, I think I got a text or some email thing, and I did it, and I went on the website. So I didn't know if it was even in effect. So when I was asked, I just said that I would look into it, because I know I signed up, and then I signed up under another contact thing twice, and I didn't get any notification. So
I did.
We can check that, because as soon as I figured out that I had not registered for the new one and I was part of the old one, then I started not only getting those, but also the weather alerts, which I'm thinking I might change. But we can discuss that, I think, with the sheriff's department and.
So we were on alerts?
Yes.
Okay.
I got them after the fact, but I know that there were some that did get them.
I did.
At the outset, so. And I think we double checked back. One of the things too is that it's a system, right, that takes information and also will spell certain things. It goes through the computer. And so, because we did look at those, we were trying to do some quality control through that process, and monitoring best we could throughout.
So just encourage people to basically sign up through the new system on the website and.
What's the name of the new one?
HyperReach.
HyperReach?
HyperReach.
HyperReach, okay.
It's very easy to sign up.
Yep, it was easy.
And if you don't have a computer, you can also call their office and they will help you sign up on site as well.
Okay.
And we've had the same complaints from the weather service, calling about it's gonna snow in Gilpin County. We live in the mountains, we understand that. The problem is that's an alert that is put out by the National Weather Service that HyperReach picks up and disseminates that based on people's registration of wanting or accepting those weather notifications.
And I did opt in initially, so it wasn't a mistake, it's just a mistake I made. So.
I got the same one at 3 in the morning.
Any more council comments, guys? Okay. Our last opportunity for audience participation, we do have David Jocelyn signed up for non-action items on the agenda. David?
I already spoke to that because it was added to the agenda after I had signed that.
I guess. Okay. Anyone out there want to talk? Now's
I
your
think
chance.
maybe Sheriff is here at his first city council meeting, right? As the sheriff?
Yeah, Sheriff.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming.
Love having all you here. Okay.
Next time.
We will then adjourn this meeting. Next council meeting is on February 5th, 2019. We will see you all there. Invite your friends and family. Adjourn.